move over trains because there's a new autism stereotype in town. Apparently, the caricature of an autistic person, or at least the chronically online autistic person, is now the quirky blue-haired liberal whose bio is stuffed full of their various mental health conditions, maybe even a flag or two. They're probably vegan, they're definitely queer, and they may even, shock horror, have pronouns. They may have them, they may carry them around with them on a day-to-day basis. Never mind, actually, scratch that. They can't really be an autistic stereotype, can they? Because they're not really autistic. They're probably self-diagnosed, which we all know is synonymous with faking it for attention. They're confused, naive little girls who have fallen for the latest social contagion to playing TikTok, leaving all young people convinced that they are neurodivergent. Whatever that means, because that's not a medical term, is it? So scratch that. Train lovers, you are safe in your position as the true autist. Mostly, I mean, some people don't believe that autism exists at all, so you can never be 100% safe. Hopefully it's obvious that I'm joking with that intro. I mean, kind of. If you've seen any of my reactions to the fake disorder cringe subreddit, you'll know that unfortunately there are a number of people who do think some version of this, who do use somebody's sexuality, gender, political leaning, personal style, the color of their hair as evidence that they're lying about being autistic or an ADHD or having a mental health condition. And I think quite a lot of people, particularly older generations, believe at least some sort of watered down version of this. Even if they haven't necessarily given it all that much thought, which might kind of be part of the problem, there's kind of this sense of, well, we didn't really have these things back in my day. So I guess in today's video, we're investigating, is wokeness turning us all autistic? Is autism a left-wing condition? Are all autists leftists? Let's find out and see. And we're starting with Blair White. So Blair White has this video with almost 1 million views, which I think shows that this isn't necessarily a fringe idea. Woke TikTok is faking mental disorders for attention. I wonder if Blair White is on fake disorder cringe. If you don't know who Blair White is, she's your fave problematic creator, of course. No, Blair White is kind of like the pretty mean girl at school.
You're a sick bitch, and here's why you're a sick bitch. If she looks like this, don't hire her.
She makes content making fun of or roasting LGBT creators, despite the fact that she's trans herself, which only makes her all the more popular with the right. It seems to give her this sort of perceived authority. She says her own opinions are center-right. I think a lot of people would probably argue they're a bit more right than that. But anyway, in this particular video, Blair discusses how people are faking mental disorders on TikTok because they think it's cute and it's part of their aesthetic.
It's because they think it's cute. It's because they're aesthetic.
And she notes how these people are always woke and they always have their pronouns listed.
I'm sorry, but there is no logical reason why the overwhelming majority of these people adhere to a specific ideology, which is they're always woke. They're always woke. They always also have their pronouns listed. The two go hand in hand. Like almost none of them lack indicators that they come from that specific political ideology.
She doesn't specifically mention autism in this video. She talks about a lot of other conditions, including ADHD.
People faking ADHD, eating disorders, and it's just this huge thing.
I still think this is a good example of how a lot of people feel about the neurodiversity movement in general. Now, you might say, Meg, she's only coming after people who actually fake conditions, not the people who truly have the conditions. Some people might think, she's standing up for those people who are really struggling here.
There are actually wonderful influencers that I did see on the app when I was looking at all the fakers for this video, in which I was actually blown away by how open they were about expressing their mental disorders. There are people that obviously did have Tourette's, obviously did have issues.
But it's Blair qualified to weed out the fakers from the real deal, particularly when she's making blanket statements like the fakers are always woke and they're always queer, basically.
And perhaps not surprising, there's a really huge crossover with the kind of person that does this and the kind of person we covered in previous TikTok videos. We're talking colored hair, which used to be cool. Please take it back from the crazies. I miss having colored hair. I used to have colored hair. We're talking the they thems. We're talking the new gender identity every week. These are also the people faking these mental disorders.
What would Blair think a real autistic person or a real ADHD would look like? And why would we care what Blair thinks a real autistic person and a real ADHD would look like? Faking conditions does happen sometimes, although I imagine most of the time you'd have to be mentally ill in order to genuinely decide to fake something. But I don't think it happens nearly as often as certain corners of the internet would have you believe. Sometimes maybe people are wrong, sometimes people might think they have one thing and then it will later turn out that they have another, and it can often be a winding path to get the correct diagnosis. I don't think we need to be making fun of people for that. And this diagnosis policing, this calling people out for faking, does it really help people who actually have these conditions as they claim? I don't think so. I think it makes people more likely to be skeptical of these diagnoses. It might make people analyze the way somebody looks and presents before they decide whether or not to believe them. You know, it seems like it's hard enough for people to believe invisible conditions as it is. We don't need to help people with that. And as I say, now we're potentially creating barriers for people who look a certain way. Last week, I did another reaction to the Fake Disorder Cringe subreddit, and the first post that I looked at, they wrote, "Why do they all look the same?" The first person, I couldn't actually find their account, but the other two posts that I reacted to, both of the people really clearly had a TikTok on their page speaking about, you know, being clinically diagnosed with these conditions. I didn't go digging for them. It wasn't hard to find. The information was just right there. If someone tells you they have a certain condition, I personally think more often than not, the option that has the least potential harmful consequences is to believe them and to be kind and to be compassionate. You might have thoughts pop into your head like, that's not how I'm used to seeing that present, or I wonder about that. Okay, whatever you say, but you could be wrong, particularly if you don't know that much about a particular condition. I'm not sure we're all always that good at being like, that's not something that I know that much about, maybe I'll reserve judgment. Seriously, I worry that I will not be believed because of all of this nonsense. And it makes me really mad. I put in the effort to go and get my clinical diagnosis because I want to have supports for continuing my education. I dropped out of school when I was 17. I had a very serious mental health decline that was directly linked to the fact that I'm autistic and being unable to handle the pressure of exams. I did well in school and I am so underqualified compared to my peers because I was autistic and nobody knew how to help me. And I'm so grateful to know now. It's kind of like 10 years too late, but now I have to worry about things like, what if a future employer decides I'm a faker and I'm not deserving of any supports? Particularly if they also know I'm vegan and wear broomstick earrings. I mean, that's not going to help me, is it? I'll have to get an I Love Trains shirt instead and get a pair of glasses or something. Blair speaks out against labeling yourself in this video.
I have this disorder. Here's my list of things that are wrong with me. And that's a very unhealthy mindset. I think that even if you genuinely suffer with a disorder, I think that assuming it as part of your identity is less than productive and less than healthy. I think you should see it as a part of you, something that you have to deal with and you have to conquer specifically.
It's kind of this pull yourself up by your bootstraps right-wing thinking. I think this mindset of I am more than just a label, not allowing your diagnosis to kind of put you in a box to lower your self-esteem. I think that has its place. However, labeling yourself is not the same as rolling over and accepting defeat. I personally think it's more about acceptance of where you're at. It's like swimming with the current rather than against it, if that makes sense. Interestingly, Blair seems to have alluded to being autistic, or I think she might have said on the spectrum herself in a couple of her videos at least. Like, F labels, am I right? Except if I'm using it and then it's fine because I'm not woke. But in all honesty, I am obviously happy for Blair to use labels for herself. But I just wish she would allow other people to do the same, you know? Just live and let live. Anyway, let's move away from Blair White and this sort of rhetoric. I love how in this meme they put the same speech bubble twice because they couldn't think of anything else to say. Chris, professionally diagnosed, just wants to live his life. AFAB non-binary person here just wants to be special. And they say ridiculous woke things like, please don't use the R slur about disabled people. How dare they? You could literally put Chris's speech bubble over Xylee too. I'm sure Xylee says the same thing. Plus, maybe Chris thinks self-diagnosis is valid too. Why are you making any assumptions about Chris's politics? Okay? I know he's not real. Chris understands that not everybody can afford an autism diagnosis. And also that wait lists in the UK are 187,000 people long. So, okay, we know that the right seems to think that autism has gone woke, or at least people who claim to have autism have gone woke. But it does seem like people on the left have also been asking, are autistic people more likely to be left-leaning and or liberal? So we're going to explore that in one moment, but first, it can be pretty upsetting how divided the world feels these days. Almost like a straight line has been drawn down the middle and we've all been divided into these two separate teams, both by our social media algorithms and inflammatory headlines from traditional media as well. In reality, I'm sure most people's opinions are not so extreme, but that's how it can feel. And of course, there absolutely has been a worrying increase in far-right rhetoric and anti-LGBT sentiment. Even though it can be hard to read, I do appreciate having the ability to keep up with what the other side are saying, which is why I'm grateful that Ground News are sponsoring another video today. Ground News is an app and website that aggregates news from 50,000 sources, allowing you to compare how different outlets cover the same story. Ground News also provides useful information like the bias, who owns a source. They also provide a factuality rating, which is super useful if you struggle to know who to trust sometimes. For this story, Trump suggests he will ban transgender athletes through executive action. Ground News has 28 sources to browse. And we can see that 7 out of the 13 sources on the right refer to transgender athletes, and they're talking about trans women as men. Fox News, which is a mixed factuality source owned by the Murdoch family, published the headline, "Trump pledges to protect women's sports from male athletes." None of the sources on the left or in the center misgender trans women. The Advocate, a high factuality source on the left, states transgender athletes make up a tiny fraction of competitive sports participants, yet the issue is frequently used as a political flashpoint by Republicans seeking to rally their base. And with the bias distribution feature, we can see that indeed most of the coverage of this story, 62%, comes from the right. The Ground News blind spot feed is wonderful too. You can browse stories that have had little to no reporting on either the left or the right to discover what you may have been missing. I think Ground News is a much needed tool in these messy times that we're living through, where human rights issues are so frequently weaponized to win elections. I really appreciate the full picture. I appreciate having knowledge of the headlines my family members might be being exposed to. You can check out Ground News at ground.news/nowwhat or scan the QR code on screen. You'll get 50% off their Vantage plan. I really believe in their mission to improve media literacy, so I hope you'll check them out. Okay, so back to, are the left autistic? There was this post on Reddit. Would you guys consider yourself left-wing? I'm left-wing myself and haven't met many right-wingers with autism. And in the online autism community, it definitely can feel a bit like we're all lefties. Sometimes there's metaphorical blue hair everywhere. Maybe that's because more people on the left feel like they're able to be open about things like their mental health struggles. You know, if you're more likely to be in therapy, you might be more likely to put yourself in positions that could lead to somebody picking up autistic traits and you getting a diagnosis. I don't think I've met anyone who was diagnosed autistic, or at least who I was aware of their diagnosis, who was right-wing. But I've definitely met people with very noticeable autistic traits who were strongly right-wing. Someone pointed out that the neurodiversity movement, which is actually what a lot of us mean when we say the autism community online, you know, is probably more likely to be left-leaning, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think the neurodiversity movement is leftist, so you'll meet more leftists in an autistic pride subreddit, but overall, I don't think so. This was responding to, you know, whether all or most autistic people are left-leaning. I agree, if your algorithm is woke autistic in quotation marks, and that probably is, you know, more of what you'll see. And then you can start to think that everybody thinks a certain way, you know, everybody thinks like you. But another argument I've seen put forward for why autistic people, you know, might be so left is this idea that autistic people have a strong sense of justice, a strong sense of right and wrong, and therefore, you know, will fight for equal rights harder than anyone alive. Or are we? We seem to be a little bit divided on the topic of sense of justice. So on the one hand, we have people who say things like, I think autistics with a strong sense of justice are so kind and sweet, like y'all really just want a softer kind of world and to be the kind of person who creates it. An often strong sense of justice is included as a positive autistic trait in these little listicles that people make. This person describes it as their good sense of morality. Paul Micallef includes it in his list of positive autistic traits.
So number 9 is having a very strong sense of justice. Now, this might come from a lifetime of being treated unfairly, who knows? But I find that a lot of us really get stuck on rules and fairness. For me personally, it's really hard to let things go when I know they could be better. So the answer of, it's just because that's how we do it, because I said so, all of those kind of answers just are not a good enough reason. So I guess the message with that is do not underestimate us.
And I don't want to take that away from anyone. You know, your sense of justice may very well be one of your favorite things about yourself. It definitely was that way for me. I was always told, you know, you're really empathetic and you'll really fight for what you believe in. And that felt like a really big, important part of my identity. We should be able to feel pride in positive autistic traits, celebrate them. You know, the diagnostic criteria for autism is so focused on deficits. And I really do believe that strong sense of justice does lead a lot of autistic people to do incredible things. Chris Packham's environmentalism comes to mind. I do sometimes wonder where movements like this would be without autistic people. However, at the same time, while it's great that autistic people will stand up or will often stand up for what they believe in, do all autistic people believe the same things? Isn't your strong sense of justice going to reflect your own moral compass, your own political leanings, maybe even your own religion?
Often an extreme sense of justice is viewed as like autistic people having some sort of moral superiority to allistic people, when really an extreme sense of justice is relative to the autistic person and whatever they perceive as unjust. Now, this could be a moral issue, but it's not always rooted in morality or logic.
Also worth noting that this strong sense of justice can actually be really annoying. It could be a negative trait as well.
This is a super dysregulating part of being autistic for me, because my reaction to something that I perceive as unjust is often disproportionate to whatever's happening.
As you can tell, I had to move because my landlord decided to sell. And you know, when you move, you have to deal with estate agents or letting agents. They're not always the most honest people. It can be some really frustrating interactions. And I personally, when somebody isn't completely honest with me and things like that, can find it very difficult to move past that and just get on with my day. Like, I think a lot of people don't like letting agents, but are able to go, that was bad behavior, and then move on with their day. For me, I can get stuck.
Having a passion for justice and equality is great, but the inflexible application of rules or enforcement of personal values without nuances will frequently lead to conflict. Yeah, but only if your morals or your approach is crappy. And that right there is the problem. No one thinks theirs is crappy.
And I've seen some autistic people try and use their strong sense of justice as an excuse for bad behavior. Like, oh, my sense of justice just ran wild in that moment, and almost kind of try and frame doing not so great things as like positive and righteous somehow. But does this sense of justice make people more likely to be left leaning? This need for fairness, perhaps a hatred for double standards? Anyone who has ever been part of a socialist or left-wing activist group will also have noticed a disproportionately high number of people exhibiting traits typically associated with autistic spectrum conditions compared to the general population. So apparently in the Labour Party report from 1958, which is, you know, the main left-leaning party in the UK, activists are described as unusually earnest young men and women who lack the necessary social skills for the successful organisation of fundraising and community events. And apparently when a focus group was asked what the Labour Party would be like if it was a guest at a party, they said likely a man who would spend ages sorting through the CDs to avoid talking to the other guests, and that he would be a bit socially awkward, listening politely, but not really taking it in. Obviously, people can be socially awkward without being autistic, but I did think that was funny. But then the very same article that offered these quotes mentions the QAnon shaman who received a lighter sentence for participating in January 6th due to his autism diagnosis. So yeah, not left wing. But I guess that was his sense of justice running wild. You see, it could kind of swing either way. So maybe it's just that autistic people are more likely to feel compelled to protest, to defy social norms and make us think about whatever we think is good and right and fair. I found this blog post: just because I'm autistic doesn't mean I have to be woke. Autistic people come in all varieties. No, we autistics are not all easily triggered, fragile, and easily offended. All people need to just toughen up and let others express themselves without cutting in with their overly progressive, ultra-sensitive, nitpicking agenda. And just as an aside, I want to say, like, obviously, even if you align with somebody politically, you're not necessarily always going to like them. You're not going to get on with every single person. Just because you think somebody has overreacted and is nitpicky and maybe not being polite, you know, doesn't mean that the things that they stand for are wrong. So anyway, we definitely can't say all autistic people are left-leaning. That doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, we have Elon Musk too, for goodness sake. Elon Musk revealed his autism diagnosis on SNL a few years ago, but his hair is firmly, metaphorically unblued these days, and we're all living with the consequences. He's currently giving away $1 million a day to voters who sign a right-wing petition. And there's a disagreement about how legal that is. I mean, like, yay, democracy, I suppose. He's also now a Republican mega donor. He's donated $75 million to the Trump campaign. He's also said that his brain implant business, Neuralink, will solve autism. I don't know if he no longer believes that he's autistic since his appearance on SNL, or whether he wants to solve himself. He does refer to himself as having Asperger's mostly, I believe, so maybe he believes that that's a separate thing. I mean, even when that was a diagnostic label, it was always considered part of the autism spectrum. Although apparently Elon said in 2022 that he does plan to implant one in himself, supposedly. And for those woke vegans watching this, there have also been some animal welfare allegations against Neuralink, which are pretty awful to read about. It seems like their animal testing practices have resulted in a lot more animals being killed than necessary, and a lot more animals killed than competitors of Neuralink. And that seems to be due to pressure from Elon to kind of like hurry up and make it work. He also reshared this on X, which basically says that women and low T men are not capable of critical thinking. Only high T alpha males and autistic people, I'm not sure if that includes autistic women, or do autistic women just not exist? I don't know. But yeah, only high T alpha males and autistic people can ask themselves, is this true? And I have to ask myself, is that true? But I suppose as a small girl, I can't really compute that question, sorry. Although maybe my autism overrides the girlness of me, I don't know. Elon is also estranged from his trans daughter. He told Jordan Peterson, my son is dead, killed by the woke mind virus, speaking about his daughter. But in response to this, his daughter Vivian's bio on TikTok is now, I promise I'm not dead. And she does look very alive and well and has beautiful super long blonde hair. But Elon used the fact that Vivian is, in his words, slightly autistic to discredit her. And I feel like I'm seeing this more and more often, not necessarily just from Elon, but people will complain about wokeness and labels until they find a label that they can use against you and use to discredit you. It seems like people are more than happy to refer to you as autistic if they can use it to infantilize you or question your ability to make decisions, particularly at the moment when that comes to transitioning. I don't know about you, but I do not want my bodily autonomy to be questioned as a result of me having autism on my medical record. The implications of that are so incredibly scary to me. Also, in response to her endorsing Kamala Harris, Elon offered to give Taylor Swift a child, so there's that. Make of that what you will. He already has 12 children. Anyway, let's stop info dumping about Elon Musk. Elon Musk aside, because he's only one person. Going back to QAnon and similar for a moment, I feel like QAnon is coming up way too often in my videos now. We had QAnon coming up in the Sia video for some reason. I don't know, QAnon always where you least expect it. I suppose it makes more sense that it's in this video than in the Sia video, but you know, there you go. But yeah, whether autistic people are more likely to hold extremist views, are more vulnerable to radicalization, is an interesting question. When reporting on a crime, a journalist will usually include if a perpetrator is autistic. I have also read articles where they've simply mentioned if the person has autistic traits, whatever that means exactly. Maybe it means they're on a waiting list for diagnosis, I don't know. But obviously, as the prevalence of an autism diagnosis is increasing, does the fact that certain people have an autism diagnosis really mean all that much? People with ASD are certainly represented amongst those affiliated with extremist groups, and some have engaged in extremist-related violent acts. Whether this is more frequent than those with other developmental disorders or those with other mental health problems is unclear. Obviously, again, autism is not a mental health condition, but autistic people can be more likely to suffer with mental health conditions. There are some studies that explore the link between autism and users of incel forums, so people who refer to themselves as involuntary celibates. There's a lot of hatred and anger towards women in these spaces. The idea that all women are money-grabbing, promiscuous, and manipulative comes across strongly on incel threads, where attractive women in particular are referred to as Stacys. And roughly a quarter of users of incel forums have reported a formal diagnosis of autism. Although it is important to note that violence, radicalization, and hostile attitudes towards women cannot be explained by autism. It seems, however, that some some autistic people may be particularly vulnerable to the impacts of incel forums. And I think that makes sense. A lot of autistic people relate to this idea of monotropism. It's kind of a theory of how autistic minds work. I'll leave my video linked about it. It's basically the idea that autistic people have minds that like to get intensely focused on one thing. And I feel like that can be used, you know, kind of for good or bad. You can basically become intensely focused and develop what we call a special interest in anything, particularly if you feel kind of disillusioned with society. Maybe you've been bullied, you're struggling to form connections with people out in the real world. Someone asked on the Autism in Women subreddit if autistic men are more likely to be misogynistic. Young men with ASD probably also have a hunger for figuring out why this or that girl doesn't like them or like some other boy and what they can do to fix it, etc. Anything they could read that explains why other humans are behaving the way they behave. And you know, like people like pickup artists online and stuff, they kind of have clear black and white easy rules that men can follow. And then this person below said it's hard to know if neurotypical men are actually less misogynistic than autistic men, or if they're just better at hiding it, which I think is a great point. And obviously we shouldn't be making sweeping generalizations like, you know, all autistic men are misogynistic. That's obviously not true. I think putting autistic people in boxes, any boxes, is a dangerous game. Of course it makes sense that autistic people would be represented all over the political spectrum. Of course it's not black and white. We've all had different upbringings, you know, we might have different religions or lack thereof. We're exposed to lots of different things online. We shouldn't assume that all or even most autistic people are definitely one thing, or that autistic people definitely can't be another thing. I remember there was an autistic creator that I followed. I still follow this autistic creator, but I remember checking out their Instagram and they wrote in a comment to somebody, "I love Trump," and they meant it sincerely, you know, they are a Trump supporter. And I remember that kind of like caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it. I think you just maybe because of the way the algorithms work, you know, you get so used to everybody who you follow having a similar viewpoint to you. And I suppose I shouldn't have made the assumption that just because someone else was autistic, I was going to completely agree with where they stand on absolutely anything. There were some good, interesting arguments made for why it might be in the best interests of autistic people, you know, to be more liberal. As this person so eloquently put it, "I am liberal because I'm autistic. My experiences in the workplace have taught me all too well that bootstraps only lift so far." Politics impacts disabled people, of course. Autism is classed as a disability. If you've seen the dismal stats on employment and autistic people, then you will know that to be the case. We may be more reliant on social support, on having access to affordable healthcare. I mean, I know who I would vote for if I was over in the US, which I'm not, so, you know, like, what do I know? But on the one hand, you have Kamala talking about preserving disabled people's dignity, about prioritizing equal access to housing, about how medical debt is so unfair because acquiring medical debt has nothing to do with how responsible you are with money. And then we have allegedly Trump saying that his disabled nephew should be left to die and his dad should just abandon him and move to Florida. We have Trump apparently saying things like nobody wants to see wounded veterans in a parade and that doesn't look good for him for some reason. We have Trump mocking a disabled journalist. We have Trump making comments about how his opponents are cognitively impaired. I wouldn't trust somebody like that to have my best interests at heart personally. But as I say, I'm not in the US. But over in the UK, the Conservative Party, so our main right-wing party, they haven't been much better. The potential future leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, recently endorsed this pamphlet, which seems to unfortunately really politicize autism and neurodiversity. I think when they say neurodiversity, they actually mean neurodivergence. So politicize neurodivergence. A few people have asked me in comments to speak about it actually. So I'm going to speak about it a little bit here. So the pamphlet reads, "Being neurodiverse," and by that they mean neurodivergent. Neurodivergent is diverging from the norm. Neurodiversity just refers to the fact that, you know, everybody is different and there is diversity in neurotypes, which, you know, is great but means something else. Sometimes people do use those terms interchangeably, but neurodivergent is the correct term, and it's just a bit of a red flag that they don't know that, but obviously they don't know much about autism. You can tell from the rest of what they have to say. So being diagnosed as neurodiverse was once seen as helpful, as it meant you could understand your own brain and so help you to deal with the world. It was an individual focused change, but now it also offers economic advantages and protections. shock horror. We should not protect the disabled anymore. It's gone too far. But yeah, I mean, it has similar vibes to the whole Blair White thing. You know, this is something you need to keep to yourself and you need to overcome, which is, again, very idealistic.
I think you should see it as a part of you, something that you have to deal with and you have to conquer specifically.
And like, what are these economic advantages and protections? Like, where are mine? Can I have them, please? Now that I have my clinical diagnosis. I mean, you can, with an autism diagnosis, apply in the UK for a personal independence payment. It's a pretty grueling process. From what I hear, it is not easy to get and to prove that you are eligible for it. And I mean, in these economic times, it's not exactly, you know, gonna set you up for life or anything like that. It's helpful if you're somebody who needs to buy disability aids. Like, disabilities can cost people more money. It goes on. If you have a neurodiversity diagnosis, which is not a thing, you do not get diagnosed as neurodiversity, then it says e.g. anxiety, autism. It puts those two things together, not to diminish the effects of anxiety. I'm somebody who struggles with anxiety. A lot of autistic people do struggle with anxiety, but anxiety and autism are two very different things. Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition. I don't know, it just feels a little bit almost like the thing that people can do to autistic people sometimes, like brushing it off as, oh, you're just a bit anxious. But you know, people shouldn't be brushing off anxiety like that either. Anyway, carry on. Then that is usually seen as a disability, a category similar to race or biological sex in terms of discrimination law and general attitudes. Oh my gosh, people are not going to be able to discriminate against autistic people. What are we going to do if we can't make fun of them? How are we gonna spend our free time? If you are a child, you may well get better treatment or equipment at school, even transport to and from home. I don't know what person would be getting transport to and from home for anxiety, but yeah, okay. If you are in the workforce, you are protected in employment terms from day one. You can more easily claim for unfair dismissal, and under disability rules, you can also require your employer to make reasonable adjustments in quotation marks to your job. And you can reveal your disability once you have been employed rather than before. Oh no, they're unfairly taking away our right to choose not to employ somebody based on their diagnosis. Of course you shouldn't have to reveal your diagnosis when applying for a job. What are you saying? You want to be able to choose not to employ people based on the fact that they are disabled. I don't know, basically the vibe is autism used to be a real diagnosis, anxiety used to be a diagnosis, but now people are just claiming to have it in order to get stuff. To be special, right? Very similar to the Blair White clip. I mean, these things that people are trying to get, reasonable adjustments in the workplace, things like being allowed to wear headphones while you're working to help with sensory sensitivities, those are not things that people who are not actually autistic or actually neurodivergent are gonna want to have. Like, it's not useful to most people. It's not like, you know, all the autistic people in the workplace getting access to all these incredible things that regular employees aren't getting, and they're getting all this wonderful special treatment. You're not gonna be, what, given £1 million? What do you think people get? I don't know. And also, I'd be completely in favor of people who are not autistic being able to access the same reasonable adjustments if they feel like they'll be helpful. If more people want to wear noise cancelling headphones while they work because it helps them concentrate, I don't see why they should be told they can't do that. So you know what? I don't know. I agree. Neurotypical rights to act like, you know, all the kids are doing it just to get freebies is just ridiculous. Once again, things being twisted for political gain. It's really, really frustrating. And most people have very little understanding of autism, so they'll just go, yeah, sounds about right. Anyway, what's the takeaway here? I don't know. Blue hair doesn't cause autism, so Blair White, you're safe. You can dye your hair crazy colors again. It's fine. Particularly if she's already autistic, then she's extra safe. In all seriousness, it does worry me that autism, neurodivergence, neurodiversity, whatever word you want to use, is being increasingly politicized. Autistic people are obviously allowed to have political opinions, but being autistic is not a political stance that you take. It is a neurodevelopmental condition that you were born with. We've used the word blue a lot in this video, so I'll use that to segue. If you missed my video about the blue trick-or-treating buckets that some parents of autistic children are making their children carry around on Halloween in order to tell the neighborhood that they're autistic, I made a video discussing that and discussing some of the concerns that I and other people have with it, and also, you know, kind of going into the reasons why some parents of autistic children do want to use them and why it might make sense and some of the alternatives, and I made it into this huge discussion. I'm always making things bigger than they need to be. I'm like video length blind. I can't keep things short. You've probably noticed. Apologies if you're somebody who likes short videos. Stick me on double speed. I won't be offended. It does reduce my watch time, but that's fine. I don't mind. Also, I have a Discord server which is connected to my Patreon, and we're going to be playing Fall Guys again, which is a game that's free to download and you can use it on a whole load of different devices and consoles. I think it's going to be the 17th of November. It's super fun. I'm really bad at it, but we're going to be playing it again. I'm going to be playing it. My husband, Lewis, is going to be playing it. My son sometimes plays as well. We just have a little text chat going at the same time. It's really fun. It's a lovely way to spend some time with other autistic people. I'm hoping we're going to do, you know, more and more like little events like that in the Discord server. But yeah, if you join the Discord server, it costs $4 to join the lowest tier, but you also get access to loads of exclusive content. I also do autistic advice where I kind of respond to questions and problems and dilemmas that people have. And remember, if you would like to get 50% off the Ground News Vantage plan, there's a QR code on screen and you can use the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Bye.